Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku stood beside Wonder Woman in the Justice League's darkest war? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Muzudafu tasted of ozone and desperation. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a flavor that had become nauseatingly familiar. He moved through the fractured cityscape like a phantom, a blur of tattered green and scarred metal. His costume, once a vibrant symbol of hope modeled after his mentor, was now a testament to 100 sleepless nights and 1,000 brutal fights. The cowl was ripped, one of the metal rabbit ears bent at a sorrowful angle. His Gran Torino-inspired cape, now more of a ragged shawl, billowed behind him, stained with grime and something that might have been his own blood. This was his life now. The solitary hunt. The unending vigil. Dark Deku, the media had called him. A ghost haunting the edges of a society he was trying to save by leaving it behind. His current target was a villain who called himself Distortion. The man's quirk was a nightmare made manifest. The ability to warp and bend the fabric of space in his immediate vicinity. Streets twisted into impossible Mobius strips, lampposts drooped like wilted flowers, and buildings flowed like wax. Fighting him was like trying to punch a dream. "You can't touch me, hero!" Distortion cackled, his voice echoing from 3 places at once. He stood atop a bus stop that was currently stretched 100 feet into the air, its metal frame groaning like a dying beast. "Your world has rules. Mine doesn't." Izuku didn't waste breath on a reply. His mind was a maelstrom of analysis, a constant stream of input from Danger Sense and output from his strategic brain. Danger Sense was a low, persistent thrum at the base of his skull, a warning that in this warped battlefield, everything was a threat. He's not creating new space, just manipulating what's there, Izuku thought, eyes scanning the chaotic scene. There are anchor points. The effect weakens the further it gets from him. He's the epicenter. He activated Float, lifting off the ground to avoid a wave of asphalt that rippled towards him. From the air, the battlefield looked even more surreal, a Salvador Dali painting brought to violent life. Black whip tendrils, dark and fluid, erupted from his arms, seeking purchase on surfaces that remained solid. They were his lifelines in a world without geometry. "Stand still!" Distortion shrieked, flicking his wrist. The air between them shimmered, and a volley of debris, chunks of concrete, a twisted bicycle, a mailbox, suddenly accelerated towards Izuku, not in a straight line, but along a corkscrewing path designed to bypass any conventional dodge. Fourth gear, F.A. Gene. Izuku built up kinetic energy, coiling his muscles. He released it in a controlled burst, rocketing sideways. He used Black Whip to snag the mailbox mid-flight and, with a ferocious roar, flung it back at the villain. It followed the same warped trajectory, a guided missile of civic service. Distortion yelped and bent the space in front of him, creating a concave lens that sent the mailbox careening harmlessly into the sky. It was a perfect defense, but it required his focus. And that was the opening Izuku needed. He pushed one for all to 45%, the familiar, crackling green energy enveloping him. He became a comet. He didn't fly straight at the villain, that was suicide. Instead, he used the distorted space to his advantage, ricocheting off the warped side of a skyscraper, using its curve to build impossible momentum. "What?" Distortion's head snapped around, his concentration breaking for a split second. It was enough. Izuku was on him. He landed on the stretched-out bus stop, his iron-soled boots clanging against the metal. He could feel the reality around him trying to peel him away, a sickening, non-Euclidean pressure. "It's over," Izuku said, his voice a low, exhausted rasp. Distortion's face, a mask of arrogant glee moments before, twisted into a snarl of pure panic. "Over? It's just beginning!" he screamed, his hands glowing with a blinding, rainbow-hued light. "If I can't have this world, I'll break it!" Danger Sense exploded. It wasn't a hum anymore. It was a piercing shriek of absolute, imminent catastrophe. This was wrong. This was more than just his quirk. The man was overloading, turning himself into a human singularity. The space around them didn't just bend, it began to tear. The colors of the world bled at the edges, dissolving into static. The sounds of the city, The distant sirens, the wind, were replaced by a deafening, high-pitched whine that felt like it was coming from inside his own skull. He's going to rip a hole in reality. The city, everyone. There was no time for a plan. No time for analysis. There was only one for all. He planted his feet. The metal of the bus stopped groaning under the strain. He drew on the vestiges within him, feeling their silent, unwavering support. The power surged, a supernova contained within his limbs. Detroit smash! He didn't aim for the man. He aimed for the effect. He punched the tearing, shimmering air in front of distortion, pouring every ounce of his energy into the blow. He wasn't just trying to knock him out, he was trying to punch reality itself back into place. For a breathtaking instant it worked. The overwhelming pressure of his smash met the chaotic unraveling of the quirk. Light and shadow wrestled. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then it broke. There was a sound like shattering glass, magnified 1,000,000 times. A spiderweb of cracks appeared in the air, not on a surface, but in the very fabric of existence. The epicenter of the break was the point where his fist had met the villain's power. From the center of that web, a void opened, a swirling vortex of impossible colors and silent screams. The pull was instantaneous and absolute. Distortion, his eyes wide with the horror of his own creation, was the first to go, sucked into the maw and vanishing with a silent shriek. Izuku felt his grip on the bus stop fail as the metal was stripped away into the vortex. Black whip tendrils lashed out, trying to find an anchor, but they found only air as the buildings around them were consumed. He was airborne, tumbling, caught in a gravitational pull stronger than anything he had ever known. The faces of his friends flashed through his mind, Uraraka's smile, Ida's determined glare, Kaken's angry, challenging smirk. All Might's voice, a beacon in his memory. You too can be a hero. Then, the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of agonizing light and sound, and Izuku Midoriya knew no more. Pain was the first sense to return. It was a dull, full-body ache, the kind that came after pushing one for all far beyond its limits. His head throbbed in time with a slow, heavy heartbeat. He felt grit and broken stone beneath his cheek. The second sense was smell. Acrid smoke, the coppery tang of blood, the smell of burned ozone, and something else, something alien and foul, like rotten meat and hot metal. It was nothing like Muzurifu. He forced his eyes open. The world was red, not the warm, gentle red of a sunset, but a horrifying, sickly red-orange that stained the sky from horizon to horizon. Thick plumes of black smoke coiled towards a ceiling of bruised, angry clouds. The air was thick with ash that fell like a morbid snow. He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. He was in an alley, sprawled amidst a pile of rubble that had once been a wall. He looked at his hands. His gauntlets were scratched and dented, but intact. He was alive. But where was he? He stumbled out of the alley and onto what had once been a major street. The architecture was all wrong, towering skyscrapers of steel and dark glass, grander and more Gothic than anything in Japan, pierced the toxic sky. Many were heavily damaged, their sides sheared off, revealing the skeletal structures within. Cars, twisted and burned out, littered the street. They were a different make, a different style. The language on a flickering neon sign across the street was English. Metropolis Grand Hotel. Metropolis? He'd heard the name in pre-Quirk-era English lessons. A fictional city. It had to be a hallucination. The after-effects of Distortion's quirk. Then he heard the screaming. It wasn't a hallucination. The journey from the ravaged streets of Metropolis was a silent, surreal ascent. Izuku sat strapped into a seat within the Javelin, a craft so sleek and advanced it felt like something from a sci-fi movie he might have watched with his mother in a lifetime that now seemed impossibly distant. Through the reinforced canopy, he watched the world fall away. The red-stained sky gave way to the bruised purple of the upper atmosphere, and then, with a sudden, breathtaking finality, to the black, stardusted velvet of space. Below them, Earth was a wounded marble. Vast swathes of the continents were shrouded in an ugly, swirling darkness, punctuated by the angry orange glows of burning cities. From this vantage, the scale of the disaster was no longer just overwhelming, it was absolute. This wasn't a localized villain attack. This was an apocalypse. His body ached with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The adrenaline from the fight had long since faded, leaving behind the sharp, stinging protest of overused muscles and the dull throb of a concussion. He felt small, untethered, a piece of driftwood swept up in a cosmic ocean. Beside him, Wonder Woman piloted the craft with an effortless grace. She hadn't spoken much since pulling him from the street, her focus absolute. Yet there was a calmness about her that was a strange comfort in the silent chaos. She was like a statue from an ancient myth come to life, immense power held in perfect, serene control. "Rest, child," she said, her voice a low, melodic timbre that cut through the hum of the engines. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the cosmos ahead. "You have earned it. You are safe for now." Izuku could only manage a weak nod. Safe. The word felt foreign. He hadn't felt safe in months. He let his head fall back against the cool metal of the headrest, and for the first time since leaving UA, allowed his vigilance to drop, if only for a moment. He was too tired to be scared, too disoriented to be defiant. Their destination soon became apparent. A massive, gleaming structure hung in high orbit, a silver star shaped like a pointed crescent. It was a space station, larger and more complex than anything he could have imagined. As the javelin approached, a section of the station's hull irised open, revealing a brightly lit docking bay. With a gentle hiss of maneuvering thrusters, they slipped inside. The moment the boarding ramp lowered, the sterile, recycled air of the station met them. It was cold and smelled of ozone and polished metal. Waiting for them at the edge of the docking bay were two figures who needed no introduction. Even in his world, their symbols were legendary, icons from a time before quirks, a fictional history that was now terrifyingly real. One was a giant of a man, his physique a study in power. A bold, red S was emblazoned on the chest of his blue suit, a symbol of hope recognized across galaxies. His face was etched with a deep, somber concern, his jaw tight. This was Superman, and the sheer gravity of his presence was enough to make the air feel heavy. The other was his opposite, a figure shrouded in shadow and grim purpose. Clad in tactical, dark gray armor with a bat emblem spread across his chest, he stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable behind a cowl with pointed ears. Every line of his body radiated suspicion and an unnerving intelligence. "Batman." Wonder Woman led Izuku down the ramp, her hand resting reassuringly on her golden lasso. "Cal." "Bruce," she said, her tone grave. "I found him on the ground, in Metropolis. He was fighting the parademons, protecting civilians." Superman's gaze, a piercing blue, softened slightly as it fell on Izuku. He saw the exhaustion, the youth beneath the grime and the grim costume. He could see the boy's multiple, barely healed fractures with his X-ray vision, and hear the frantic, tachycardic rhythm of his heart. Batman, however, remained unmoved. His eyes, visible as stark white slits in the darkness of his cowl, narrowed. They swept over Izuku in a clinical, analytical pass, cataloging every detail: the advanced support gear, the scorch marks on the gauntlets, the strange energy signature that pulsed faintly around him, and the sheer, brutal extent of his injuries. "Who are you?" Batman's voice was a low, gravelly growl. It wasn't a question, it was a demand. An interrogation that had already begun. Izuku flinched, instinctively straightening up, trying to project a strength he did not feel. I'm Deku," he stammered, the name feeling flimsy and childish in this place of gods. "That is not a name," Batman stated flatly. "Where are you from?" "You are not in any known database. Your power signature is unlike any metahuman on record. It fluctuates wildly." "Explain." "Bruce, enough," Superman interjected, his voice a gentle but firm counterpoint. "Can't you see he's injured? He's just a boy. In this war, being just a boy is not an exemption from being a threat," Batman shot back, his gaze never leaving Izuku. He appeared from nowhere in the middle of a war zone, wielding an incredible amount of unknown energy. He could be a weapon from Apocalypse. A Trojan horse. Izuku's head swam. Apocalypse? The names were alien, the tension suffocating. He felt like a specimen under a microscope. "I saw him fight, Bruce," Diana said, her voice ringing with an authority that even Batman seemed to respect. She stepped slightly forward, positioning herself between Izuku and the Dark Knight. His movements were not for conquest or destruction. They were to shield, to save. He fought with the heart of a hero. That is all the proof I require for now. Before the tense standoff could escalate, a blur of red and yellow lightning resolved into a third man standing beside them. He was leaner than the others, his costume a vibrant crimson, with a lightning bolt emblem on his chest. He was vibrating with barely contained energy, his eyes wide and curious. "Whoa, hey, new guy," he said, the words tumbling out of him at a rapid pace. He zipped over to Izuku, circling him once before stopping. "Diana wasn't kidding, you look like you went 12 rounds with the Thanagarian snare beast. Cool costume, by the way. Very rabbit-themed. What's with the green lightning? Are you a speedster? I'm the Flash, by the way. Fastest man alive. Usually." He stuck out a gloved hand. Izuku, bewildered by the sudden shift in energy, stared at the hand for a moment before shaking it. Deku. And no, not a speedster. It's complicated. Barry, Batman's voice cut in, sharp as a razor. Not now. The Flash held up his hands in surrender. Right. Sorry. Tense war room vibe. Got it. He zipped over to a nearby console and returned a moment later, pushing a foil-wrapped protein bar into Izuku's hand. Here. You look like you need this more than I do. It's got like 1,000 calories. Tastes like chalk and sadness, but it gets the job done. The small, unexpected act of kindness was so disarming that Izuku felt a lump form in his throat. He gave a small, grateful nod, unable to speak. Take him to the conference room, Superman said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He needs answers. And so do we. The conference room was dominated by a large, circular table and a panoramic window that offered a god's eye view of the wounded Earth. At the center of the table, a holographic projector sprang to life, displaying a three-dimensional map of the planet. It was a sea of red alerts. Izuku, still clutching the protein bar, sat at the table while the four heroes stood. Diana remained near him, a silent guardian. It was Batman who began the briefing, his voice a cold, dispassionate litany of facts that painted a picture of utter hopelessness. 6 days ago, coordinated boom tubes opened over every major capital city on the planet. The invasion was instantaneous and overwhelming. The aggressor is Darkseid, the tyrannical god-ruler of the planet Apocalypse. The hologram shifted, showing a terrifying, granite-faced being in ornate blue armor. His eyes glowed with a malevolent red energy. Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's temperature. He had felt killing intent from villains like Shigaraki and All for One, but this being radiated something far worse, absolute, cosmic indifference. The casual cruelty of a god swatting a fly. His armies are endless, Batman continued, a legion of genetically engineered soldiers called parademons. They are strong, fast, and feel no fear. But they are not his primary weapon. The hologram changed again, showing horrifying footage from a fallen city. People were not just running or fighting, they were standing still, their faces utterly blank, tears streaming from their vacant eyes as a low, discordant hum echoed through the streets. Then, as one, they turned and began to mindlessly attack their own soldiers and heroes. His true weapon is the anti-life equation, Superman said, his voice heavy with sorrow. It is a mathematical formula, a psychic plague that allows Darkseid to dominate the will of any sentient being who hears it. It doesn't just control you. It erases you. It proves, on a fundamental level, that hope, freedom, and self-will are meaningless. It leaves behind only an empty shell that exists to serve Darkseid. Izuku stared at the screen, his stomach churning. He thought of Eri, of the way Overhaul had tried to unmake her, to erase her very being. This was that same evil, magnified to a planetary scale. He has taken Asia, Europe, and most of North America, Batman stated, gesturing to the sea of red on the hologram. Our forces are broken. Communication is down. Morale is non-existent. Every person he converts becomes another soldier in his army. We are not just losing a war of attrition, we are actively fueling our own destruction. The silence that followed was heavier than any physical weight. Izuku looked at the faces of these legendary heroes. He saw the grim resolve in Wonder Woman's eyes, the profound sadness weighing down Superman's mighty shoulders, the frenetic worry behind the Flash's easygoing facade, and the cold, burning intensity of Batman's focus. They were fighting. They were losing. The shock and disorientation that had clouded Izuku's mind began to recede, replaced by the familiar, sharp-edged clarity of a crisis. His brain, conditioned by years of analysis and life-or-death battles, began to work, a desperate engine kicking into gear. He took a shaky breath. Can you block it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Batman turned his head, the white lenses of his cowl fixing on him. We've tried. Psychic shields, sonic dampeners, jamming frequencies. Nothing works. The equation isn't a signal that can be blocked. It's a concept that is understood. But it's being broadcast somehow, right? Izuku pressed, his voice gaining a bit more strength. He stood up and walked closer to the holographic table, his eyes darting across the patterns of conquest. The effect is absolute where it's focused, but it must be projected from somewhere. Is it coming from his ships? Is there a central broadcast point, or is it a network? The questions hung in the air. They were sharp, tactical. Not the questions of a lost child, but of a strategist. Superman looked at Batman, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Izuku, lost in his own train of thought, began to mutter, a habit he'd never been able to break. If the deployment pattern is radio from the major cities, then they're not just conquering, they're converting, creating a forward army. But the energy cost to broadcast on that scale must be immense. So there has to be a central transmitter, or multiple powerful amplifiers on the ground. His finger traced a line on the hologram, connecting fallen capitals. Are the parademons a hive mind, or do they have field commanders? Does their effectiveness diminish when they're further away from a command source? Do they need to recharge their connection to the equation? He looked up, suddenly realizing he was thinking out loud. Sorry, I do that sometimes. The Flash let out a low whistle. Kid asks good questions. Batman said nothing for a long moment. He simply watched Izuku, his expression unreadable. Inside the cowl, however, a dozen calculations were running. The boy's analysis was fast, insightful, and frighteningly accurate. He had processed the tactical situation of cosmic scope and, in less than a minute, had identified the same strategic weak points that had taken Batman and Cyborg hours of analysis to theorize. This was not a normal mind. We believe the primary broadcast source is Darkseid's flagship, the Executrix, Batman finally said, his tone still gruff, but lacking the earlier edge of outright dismissal. But it is protected by the full might of his armada. A direct assault has been unsuccessful. The word unsuccessful was laced with the cold sting of catastrophic failure. Izuku looked from the horrifying map to the faces of the heroes around him. He saw legends pushed to the brink of despair. In their eyes, he saw the same exhaustion he felt in his own bones, the same fear he had been running from. They were fighting to save their world, and they were watching it die. And in that moment, something inside him solidified. He was not in his world. He was not fighting for his friends or his country, but before him were people in need of saving, and a darkness that needed to be fought. That was a language he understood. That was the core of his being. He straightened his shoulders, the motion pulling at his bruised ribs. He looked each of them in the eye, his own green eyes, once wide with fear and confusion, now burning with a familiar, unwavering fire. I'll help, he said. The words were quiet, but they resonated in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. Batman's cowl shifted slightly. You don't understand the scope of what we are facing. I understand that people are hurting, Izuku countered, his voice gaining strength with every word. I understand that a villain is taking away their freedom, their very selves. And I understand that you are fighting to stop him. That's all I need to know. We don't know anything about you, son, Superman said gently, though his eyes held a newfound respect. Your power, it's immense, but it seems to damage you. It's called One for All, Izuku explained, the name feeling sacred on his tongue. He looked at his own scarred hand, clenching it into a fist. It's not my power, not really. It's a power that's been passed down, from one person to another, for generations. A sacred torch. It was created to fight a great evil, to be a symbol that people can believe in, even when things are dark. It's the crystallization of hope. The word hope hung in the air. In this room, in this war, it was the most precious and depleted resource. The explanation struck a chord. Diana's expression was one of profound understanding. The legacy of the Amazons, the duty passed from mother to daughter, was a similar sacred trust. Superman, the ultimate symbol of hope for his world, a legacy from a dead planet, heard a kindred spirit in the boy's words. He saw the S on his chest not as his own, but as something he carried for others, just as this boy carried his torch. A power fueled by hope, to be a symbol of peace, Diana murmured, a small, sad smile gracing her lips. It seems some truths are universal, no matter the world. She turned to face Batman and Superman, her decision made. He stays. He fights with us. Superman nodded, his earlier apprehension replaced by a firm resolve. I agree. All eyes turned to Batman. The Dark Knight stood motionless for a long time, the gears of his mind turning, weighing the variables. The boy was an unknown, a wild card. But his tactical acumen was undeniable. His power was a double-edged sword, but potentially a devastating one. And his spirit, his unwavering, almost naive declaration to help in the face of oblivion, was a light in a universe that was rapidly running out of it. It was a foolish, illogical variable. And perhaps, the kind they desperately needed. Fine, he grunted, the word clipped. He turned his gaze to Diana. He is your responsibility. His housing, his integration, his actions, all of it. It is a responsibility I accept gladly, Diana replied, placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder. The warmth and strength in her touch were grounding, a silent promise. Izuku felt a wave of relief so intense his knees almost buckled. He had a place. He had a purpose. He wasn't just lost anymore. He was a soldier in a new war. Okay, great. Welcome to the team, Green Rabbit, the Flash said, breaking the solemn mood. First things first, let's get you to the medbay. Then we can find you some food that doesn't taste like despair, and maybe a new costume name. We can workshop it. As Wonder Woman guided him from the room, Izuku took one last look at the holographic Earth. The sea of red was still there. The war was still raging. The despair was still a palpable threat. But now, in the heart of the Justice League's watchtower, a tiny, defiant flicker of green had been added to the fight. And Izuku Midoriya, the boy who inherited a symbol, prepared to show a universe of gods and monsters what it meant to go plus ultra. The Watchtower's medbay was a place of quiet miracles and grim realities. It was less a hospital and more a temple to xenobiology and advanced medicine, a sterile white room filled with technology that hummed with quiet, alien power. Izuku lay on a diagnostic biobed, the surface cool and strangely soft beneath him, as a pale blue light scanned his body. The League's resident physician was not human. He was tall and green-skinned, with a high-collared blue cape and piercing red eyes that seemed to look through flesh and bone into the very essence of a person. John Johns, the Martian manhunter, observed the scanner's holographic output with a stoic, unreadable expression. Wonder Woman stood nearby, her arms crossed, a silent, concerned sentinel. His physiology is remarkable, John stated, his voice a calm, telepathic resonance that echoed directly in their minds rather than their ears. He possesses a skeletal structure reinforced by the constant stress of his own power, similar to a Kryptonian's but achieved through traumatic adaptation rather than natural evolution. There are dozens of microfractures, old and new, in various states of healing. His ligaments are scarred and thickened. His body is a roadmap of self-inflicted damage. The hologram shifted, highlighting Izuku's nervous system, which flared with a brilliant emerald light. And this energy, John continued, a flicker of what might have been surprise in his crimson eyes. It is not a single entity. It is a chorus. I sense multiple presences intertwined with his own, a lineage of wills residing within him. They are faint, but they are there. They act as a psychic buffer, a reinforcement of his spirit. He turned his gaze to Izuku. You are never truly alone, are you, young one? Izuku, who had long since grown used to the silent whispers and sudden encouragements from the vestiges, could only nod, a profound sense of validation washing over him. He wasn't going crazy. The diagnosis is clear, John concluded, the light fading. Extreme muscular and skeletal exhaustion, a mild concussion, and cellular degradation consistent with channeling an energy source his body is not fully capable of containing. He heals at an accelerated rate, but the damage he inflicts upon himself is faster. He is a candle burning at both ends. Diana's expression hardened with resolve. Then we will teach him to temper the flame. The training room of the watchtower was a cavernous space where reality was subjective. The walls were composed of programmable hard light emitters that could replicate any environment, any foe. At Diana's command, the sterile grid floor dissolved, replaced by the shattered, rubble-strewn streets of Metropolis. A dozen holographic parademons materialized, their chitinous wings buzzing as they shrieked and charged. Instinct took over. Izuku exploded into motion. One for all, full call at 45%. Green lightning arced across his body. He was a blur, a human cannonball ricocheting off the simulated debris. His first punch, a Delaware smash, sent a shockwave of air that tore 3 of the parademons to pieces. He used Black Whip to snag another, slamming it into a third before vaporizing them both with a close-range St. Louis smash. He was fast, powerful, and utterly devastating. In under 10 seconds, all 12 holograms were gone. He landed in a crouch, breathing heavily, the familiar ache already starting in his joints. He looked up at Diana, expecting a nod of approval, a sign that he was ready. Instead, her expression was one of deep disappointment. "You fight like a flood," she said, her voice echoing in the now silent room. She walked towards him, her golden sandals making no sound on the simulated concrete. "You overwhelm, you destroy, you erode your own banks with your ferocity. It is mighty, yes. But it is also wasteful, undisciplined, and ultimately self-destructive." Izuku felt a flush of shame. "But I won. They're all gone." "These were mindless drones," she countered, gesturing to the empty space. "Against a true warrior, a single wasted movement is an opening. A single moment of lost balance is a death sentence. The power you wield is a gift, Izuku Midoriya. You treat it like a cudgel. A warrior must treat their power as a blade, to be kept sharp, balanced, and used with precision. Every cut, every parry, every step must have a purpose." She summoned a single parade-on hologram, larger and more menacing than the others. "Again. But this time, you will not use your smashes. You will not use more than 30% of your power. You will face it as a warrior, not a natural disaster." Frustration warred with his respect for her. How could he fight these things without his ultimate weapon? But one look into her stern, ancient eyes told him this was not a negotiation. He took a deep breath, dialed back the crackling aura of One for All, and faced his opponent. The next hour was the most humiliating training session of his life. The parade-on charged. Izuku dodged and tried to land a punch. Diana's voice cut through the air. "Your footing is wrong. You are off balance." He tried a sweeping kick. "You overextended. You are open." He used Black Whip to try and restrain it. "A good instinct, but you relied on the whip to do the work. You failed to move with it." Again and again, the hologram knocked him down. He was faster, stronger, but it was relentless, and every mistake he made was instantly and brutally punished. Diana didn't interfere. She simply observed, her voice a constant, sharp corrective, chipping away at his bad habits. Finally, bruised and panting, Izuku lay on his back, the Parade-mon hologram standing over him, ready for a final blow before Diana dismissed it. "Power is not a substitute for skill," she said, offering him a hand. He took it, and she pulled him to his feet with an ease that belied her strength. "Your body is a weapon. Your power is the force behind it. But the finest steel is useless in the hands of one who does not know how to wield it. We will start from the beginning." And so they did. For days that bled into weeks, the training room became Izuku's world. Diana deconstructed his entire fighting style and began to rebuild it from the ground up. She taught him the fundamentals of Amazonian combat, a style that blended the brutal efficiency of Spartan warfare with the fluid grace of Pancratian. She taught him how to stand, how to shift his weight, how to generate power from his core, not just his limbs. She made him spar with her for hours, armed with only a wooden practice sword and shield. He, with the power to level buildings, was utterly helpless against her. She flowed around him, her movements a dance of deadly precision. A flick of her wrist would disarm him. A shift in her stance would use his own momentum to send him sprawling. Anticipate, don't just react, she would say, her practice sword resting gently against his throat. See the attack before it is launched. Watch the shoulders, the hips, the eyes. Every body tells a story. You must learn to read it. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to learn. He stopped trying to overpower her and started to watch. His analytical mind, his greatest asset, finally kicked into gear. He began to see the patterns, the subtle tells she spoke of. He started to use his gauntlets not just for punching, but for parrying, deflecting blows in a shower of sparks. He learned to use his iron-soled boots to block low sweeps, the reinforced metal ringing like a bell. He filled a new notebook, which he'd gotten from a watchtower replicator, with frantic sketches and observations. He titled it, Hero Analysis for a New World, Volume 1. The first 20 pages were dedicated to her. Wonder Woman Fighting Style Analysis, he wrote. Economy of motion is paramount. No wasted energy. Her power is immense but always controlled. She draws from a lower center of gravity than most fighters I've studied. Her style is a perfect synthesis of offense and defense. Her shield is as much a weapon as her sword. Key takeaway: use the opponent's force against them. Turn defense into a counterattack. One day, during a simulation against a dozen parademons, he put it all together. He stayed at 30%, just as she'd commanded. He moved like a green-tinged whirlwind, but it was a controlled storm. He used the charging parademon's momentum to spin and throw it into another. He used Black Whip not to slam, but to create tripwires and disarm them of their energy staffs. He used FAG not for a devastating smash, but for short, explosive bursts of speed to reposition himself, flowing through the battle like water around rocks. He finished the last one with a precise, powerful axe kick to the neck, landing in a perfect, balanced stance. He stood in the center of the room, breathing evenly, his muscles tired but not screaming in agony. The familiar, self-destructive pain of one for all was absent. He looked at Diana. A rare, genuine smile touched her lips. Better, she said. You are beginning to understand. You are learning to be a warrior. The Watchtower's observatory was a place of profound silence. It was a dome of transparent material that looked out upon the endless tapestry of space. Below, the earth hung like a wounded jewel, its city lights extinguished, its atmosphere scarred. It was a constant, humbling reminder of what they were fighting for. Izuku sat on a bench, his notebook open on his lap, sketching a diagram of Diana's shield bash technique. They had just finished a grueling session, and the quiet of the observatory was a welcome respite. Diana stood at the window, her silhouette framed by the cosmos, her gaze fixed on the world below. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was comfortable, the quiet understanding of a student and a master, of two warriors at rest. Why? Izuku asked, his voice soft, not wanting to break the spell of the room. Why are you doing all this? For me, I mean. Diana turned from the window, her expression thoughtful. When I first saw you in Metropolis, you were outmatched, alone, and fighting a battle you could not possibly win. Yet you fought. Anyone would have, he said, a reflexive bit of self-deprecation. No, she corrected him gently. They would not. Many would run. Many would hide. Many would surrender to their fear. But you fought with a purity of purpose I have seen very few times in my long life. You were not fighting for glory, or vengeance, or even out of anger. You were fighting because people were in danger, and it was the right thing to do. It was your truth. She walked over and sat beside him on the bench. My mother, Queen Hippolyta, forged me from clay and gave me life. But it was the gods of Olympus who gave me my gifts. One of them was from Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. It is the spirit of truth. It allows me to see the core of a person, to feel the sincerity of their convictions. When I look at you, Izuku Midoriya, your spirit shines with an almost blinding light. It is honest, and it is pure. Izuku stared at her, utterly speechless. He was used to being called reckless, a crybaby, a problem child. To be described as something pure, something shining, it was more than he could process. That's why I trust you, she finished. Because I know that no matter the odds, no matter the fear, you will always strive to do what is right. That is a quality rarer and more valuable than any superpower. He looked down at his scarred hands, a whirlwind of emotion in his chest. Back home, he began, his voice thick with emotion, my mentor, the man who gave me one for all, his name was All Might. He was the #1 hero, our symbol of peace. He saved everyone with a smile. He made people feel safe just by showing up. He was a pillar for our whole society. He finally voiced the fear that had been haunting him for years. But I'm not him. I don't always smile. I get scared. I get hurt. Being that kind of symbol, it's so much pressure. It feels like I'm standing in the shadow of a giant, and if I make one mistake, I'll let everyone down. I'll tarnish everything he built. Diana listened with a deep, patient empathy. When he finished, she placed a hand on his shoulder. A symbol and a spirit are two different things, Izuku, she said wisely. A symbol is something people look up to. It is an ideal, often projected onto a person. It can be a heavy burden, as you know. It requires you to be what the people need you to be. She looked out at the earth again. But a spirit is what you are. It is your unshakable core. All Might was a symbol of peace, but his spirit was one of selfless sacrifice. That is what you inherited, not just his power, but the spirit behind it. You do not need to be his reflection. You only need to be true to your own spirit. That is more than enough. Her words were a balm on a wound he hadn't realized was so deep. She understood. She, a literal goddess, a princess of an immortal race, understood the crushing weight of his legacy. In that moment, their bond transcended that of a teacher and a student. They were two pillars, from two different worlds, recognizing the shared strain of holding up the sky. The call came from Batman. A pocket of survivors had been located in a collapsed sector of the Chicago subway system. A seismic event, caused by a nearby battle, had sealed them in 3 days ago. Their life support was failing, and worse, Paranon patrols were beginning to nest in the tunnels above, drawn by the faint life signatures. A large-scale assault was out of the question. It would bring the whole network down on top of the survivors. It was a mission that required a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It will be just the two of you, Batman's voice crackled over the javelin's comms as they streaked through the upper atmosphere. I need a team that can move fast, quiet, and handle heavy resistance in close quarters if necessary. Superman's presence would draw too much attention, and Flash's vibrational frequency could destabilize the tunnels. This is your mission. We understand, Diana replied, her hands steady on the controls. Izuku sat in the co-pilot seat, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. His first real mission in this new world. He wasn't afraid. He was focused. He went over Diana's lessons in his mind: control, precision, purpose. The javelin landed silently in a ruined park miles from the subway entrance. Under the cover of the toxic red twilight, they made their way into the dark, gaping maw of the tunnel. The air was cold, damp, and smelled of decay and that alien, metallic scent of the parademons. Diana drew her sword and shield, the mythical weapon seeming to glow with a faint inner light in the oppressive darkness. Izuku activated full cowl, but kept it at a low, humming 25%. His green lightning was a stark, vibrant contrast to the shadows, but it was controlled, contained. They moved like ghosts through the tunnels. Diana took the lead, her senses honed by centuries of combat. Izuku followed, his danger sense a low thrum that acted as an early warning system, alerting him to loose ceiling tiles and unstable floors. They found the nest at a major junction. 24 parademons were crawling over the walls and ceiling like grotesque insects, their chittering cries echoing through the cavernous space. They were guarding the entrance to the lower maintenance tunnel where the survivors were trapped. I will hold their attention, Diana whispered, her voice a deadly promise. You are faster. Get to the survivors. Clear a path for their escape. I will be their shield. You will be their salvation. Before Izuku could even nod, she moved. She wasn't a stealthy infiltrator anymore. She was a goddess of war, and she announced her presence with the thunderous clash of her bracelets, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. To me, minions of Darkseid, she roared, her voice a clarion call of defiance. The parademons shrieked and swarmed her. And then, the dance began. Izuku watched for a split second, awestruck. Diana was a whirlwind of bronze, silver, and gold. She didn't give a single inch of ground. Her sword was a blur, severing limbs and heads. Her shield was a battering ram, crushing exoskeletons. She parried, she blocked, she spun, every movement flowing into the next, a perfect, lethal ballet. She was holding the choke point, a single warrior against a legion. She was the immovable object. That was his cue. He became the unstoppable force. He pushed his power to 35%, the lessons of the training room at the forefront of his mind. Precision. Purpose. He didn't charge through the fray. He went over it. He used float to launch himself towards the ceiling, then kicked off, angling towards the maintenance tunnel entrance. A Paimon broke from the melee to intercept him. Izuku, remembering his training, didn't meet its charge with a smash. He spun in midair, parrying its energy staff with his gauntlet, the impact sending a jolt up his arm. He used the momentum of the block to swing his body around, landing a precise, powerful kick to the creature's wing joint, sending it spiraling into a wall. He landed silently before the block tunnel entrance. The door was buckled, a massive piece of concrete pinning it shut. Behind him, the sounds of Diana's battle were a symphony of divine fury. He had to work fast. He placed his hands on the concrete slab. Full cowl, 45%, he whispered, the green energy flaring brighter. He didn't just push. He found the precise stress points, the fractures in the stone. He applied steady, controlled pressure, his muscles screaming, his bones groaning. With a great, grating roar of stone on metal, the slab shifted. He pushed it aside, revealing the darkened tunnel beyond. "Hello?" he called out. "I'm a hero. We're here to get you out." A few terrified faces, smudged with dirt and fear, peeked out. There were 8 of them, a mix of transit workers and civilians. "Come on! Quickly! This way!" he urged, his voice calm and reassuring, echoing the hero he so admired. As he began to lead the survivors out, a new threat emerged. A larger, bulkier Paimon, an alpha brute, tore through the weaker drones, swatting them aside. It ignored Diana, its glowing red eyes fixed on the escaping civilians. It let out a deafening roar and charged. Diana was occupied, pinned by 3 others. She couldn't intercept. It was up to him. "Get behind me!" Izuku yelled to the civilians. He planted his feet, positioning himself between them and the monster. The lessons flooded his mind. Anticipate. Use its momentum. Create an opening. The brute swung a massive, club-like fist. Izuku didn't try to block it head-on. At the last second, he dropped into a low stance, letting the blow whistle over his head. He channeled Fa Gene into his legs and exploded upward, driving his fist into the creature's unarmored elbow joint. It wasn't a smash. It was a targeted, disciplined strike. There was a sickening crunch as the joint shattered. The brute roared in pain and fury, staggering. It was the opening. "Diana, now!" he yelled. Wonder Woman dispatched her last opponent, and her lasso of truth flew through the air, a streak of gold. It wrapped around the brute's thick neck. With a powerful heave, she yanked the creature off its feet, its charge completely broken. It crashed to the ground, helpless. Her sword flashed once, and it was over. The tunnel fell silent, save for the ragged breathing of the survivors. They worked in perfect, unspoken sync to evacuate the civilians. Izuku used Black Whip to create safety lines and carry the injured, his movements swift and gentle. Diana walked beside them, a reassuring, powerful presence that kept the darkness at bay. Back in the Javelin, as they ascended into the bruised sky, one of the rescued civilians, a young girl no older than Eri, shyly tugged on Izuku's torn cape. "Thank you, Mr. Green Lightning Man," she whispered. Izuku looked at her, then at Diana, who gave him a small, proud nod. A real smile, not a forced one, spread across his face. He had not been a symbol. He had not been a flood. He had been a hero. A warrior. And for the first time in this dark, broken world, Izuku Midoriya felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The war was a disease, and the watchtower was a sterile bubble floating above the infection. Inside its polished corridors, there was a semblance of order, of strategy, of hope. But the longer the war dragged on, the more the membrane of that bubble thinned. The disease was seeping in, not through the airlocks or the hull, but through the minds of its inhabitants. The anti-life equation was more than a weapon of conquest. It was a philosophical poison. It was broadcast across the planet in a low, subsonic, psychic hum, a constant background radiation of despair. For the enslaved masses on Earth, the effect was absolute. For the heroes in orbit, shielded by the Watchtower's advanced systems and their own formidable wills, it was a slower, more insidious process, a creeping rot that attacked the roots of their heroism. Izuku first noticed it in the small things. He saw it in the way the Flash, Barry Allen, no longer vibrated with restless energy. His usual rapid-fire jokes and optimistic quips were replaced by long silences. He'd sit at the comm station, staring at the map of his fallen central city, his expression hollow. The hope that fueled his speed was being siphoned away, leaving him feeling sluggish and heavy. He saw it in Captain Atom, a being of near-infinite nuclear power, who now spent hours in the reactor core, surrounding himself with the familiar hum of quantum energy, as if trying to drown out the silence in his own head. His confidence, once as solid as his quantum strength and body, had become brittle. He heard it in the strained conversations, the short tempers. A strategic disagreement between Batman and Green Arrow that normally would have been a tense but respectful debate escalated into a shouting match. Aquaman, isolated from his lost kingdom, grew withdrawn and hostile. Even Superman, the unwavering sun around which they all orbited, seemed dimmer. The weight of a billion silent screams from the planet below was pressing down on him, and the lines of exhaustion on his face were carved deeper each day. The Watchtower, once a vibrant hub of heroes, was becoming a tomb, haunted by the ghosts of their fading hope. Yet, Izuku felt strangely insulated from the worst of it. He felt the despair, of course. It was a cold pressure at the back of his mind, a whisper in the dark that told him he was small, that his efforts were meaningless, that he was a lost child who would die worlds away from anyone who ever cared about him. But whenever the whispers grew too loud, something else rose to meet them. It was the vestiges of One for All. They were a silent chorus in his soul. When the equation whispered of futility, he felt the stubborn, unyielding defiance of the seventh user, Nana Shimura, who had faced all for one with a smile, knowing she would not survive. When it whispered of solitude, he felt the camaraderie of the fifth user, Daigoro Banjo, a rowdy but fiercely loyal hero. When it whispered of fear, he felt the calming, analytical presence of the fourth, Haikid Shinomori, who had spent his life in the shadows, understanding the nature of his power. And above all, when the despair threatened to swallow him whole, he felt the booming, indomitable presence of All Might. It's fine now. Why? Because I am here. The memory, the feeling, the very essence of that unwavering heroism was a bulwark against the tide of cosmic nihilism. John's words echoed in his mind. You are never truly alone. The equation was designed to isolate and conquer a single will. It didn't know how to fight nine. Because of this, Izuku became an unintentional source of light in the growing gloom. His earnest optimism, which might have seemed naive weeks ago, was now a vital resource. He would sit with Barry, not offering platitudes, but talking about speed, asking him to explain the speed force. The simple act of engaging Barry on the subject he loved, of showing genuine fascination, was enough to reignite a small spark in the speedster's eyes. He would bring nutrient paste to a brooding Aquaman, talking quietly about the ocean of his world, of its strange and wonderful creatures, a simple connection that breached the king's walls of grief. He didn't try to fix their despair. He just reminded them of who they were. He was the kid from another world who still saw them as the legends they were, not the failing generals of a lost war. His unwavering belief in them, in their fight, began to act as a low-grade antidote to the poison seeping into their hearts. Batman observed this phenomenon with cold, detached interest. The boy Deku was a walking, talking anomaly. A psychological counteragent whose effectiveness defied logic. He was another variable, another tool to be analyzed and, if possible, weaponized. But the equation was also adapting. Darkseid was not a mindless force. He was a god of tyranny, and he understood the nature of his enemies. He knew their strengths were also their most profound weaknesses, and he decided it was time to make an example. John Stewart, Green Lantern of Sector 2814, was a pillar of stability in the Justice League. He was a former Marine, an architect. His mind was a place of structure, of blueprints and solid foundations. His will was the bedrock upon which he built emerald constructs of incredible power and complexity. If Superman was the League's heart and Batman its brain, John Stewart was its spine. His current mission was a desperate one, to lead a squadron of the last free-flying military craft on a surgical strike against an anti-life broadcast tower in the ruins of Cairo. The tower was one of several secondary amplifiers, and destroying it would free a small part of the continent, creating a potential foothold. All wings, report in. John's voice was calm and steady over the comms, a rock in the turbulent air. He flew at the head of the formation, encased in a shimmering green aura, his power ring glowing with a steady, confident light. Red leader, standing by. Blue wing, all clear. Gold squadron, ready to engage. They swept over the endless dunes of the Sahara, the red sky of Darkseid's rain turning the sand to a sea of blood. In the distance, the tower rose from the skeletal remains of the city, a jagged shard of apocalyptic metal, pulsing with a sickening, discordant energy. Engage attack pattern Delta, John commanded. Focus all fire on the primary energy conduit. Ignore the ground troops. Get in, destroy the conduit, and get out. The jets peeled off, unleashing a volley of missiles. Green energy lanced from John's ring, forming a massive, intricate battering ram that slammed into the tower's side, shaking it to its foundations. Parademons swarmed from the base of the tower, a tide of screeching monsters, but the jets were too high, too fast. The plan was working, and then Darkseid turned his gaze upon him. From the bridge of the Executrix, light years away, the god of evil focused his consciousness. He did not send an army. He did not unleash his Omega beams. He sent a whisper, a single, perfectly tailored sliver of the anti-life equation, aimed not at the Green Lantern, but at the man, John Stewart. The psychic hum that was a constant background noise in John's mind suddenly sharpened into a clear, insidious voice. It didn't sound like Darkseid. It sounded like his own commanding officer from the Marines. Failure to protect your unit, Stewart. John gritted his teeth, his construct wavering for a split second. Maintain formation, he barked, shaking his head to clear it. The whisper came again, this time in the voice of his old architect professor. Your foundations are flawed. The entire structure is doomed to collapse. It's your fault. Shut up, he muttered, pouring more will into his ring. The green light flared brighter, a desperate attempt to burn away the thoughts. Then came the image, projected directly into his mind's eye with perfect, soul-shattering clarity. The planet Xanshi. A mission years ago. A hubristic mistake. A moment of arrogance that had led to the destruction of an entire world. He saw the faces of the billions of souls he had failed to save, their silent accusations more devastating than any scream. He saw his wife, Katma Tue, another lantern, looking at him not with love, but with bitter disappointment. All those lives, extinguished because of your pride. This time, the voice was Katma's. You are not a builder, John. You are a destroyer. Everything you try to protect turns to dust. His concentration shattered. The battering ram construct dissolved into a shower of green sparks. Lantern, what's happening? Red Leader's frantic voice crackled in his ear. Your construct is gone. John couldn't answer. He was no longer in the skies over Cairo. He was back at Xanshi, watching the planet crack apart, feeling the psychic death cries of its people. The guilt, the failure, the shame he had carried for years, buried under layers of discipline and duty, was unearthed and amplified 1,000-fold. The equation didn't tell him he was a slave. It told him the truth he had always secretly believed, that he was a failure. That his will was a sham. That he was unworthy. You built your life on a lie, John Stewart. You are not a hero. You are a monument to failure. And this is what failure earns you. The last vestiges of his will crumbled. The brilliant green light of his ring, the symbol of the most powerful weapon in the universe, began to flicker. It sputtered like a dying candle, fighting against the suffocating darkness in its wielder's heart. No, he whispered, his voice cracking. No, but it was too late. The light went out. His flight aura vanished. He dropped from the sky like a stone, his body limp. He crashed into the sands at the base of the tower, the impact sending up a plume of red dust. In the watchtower, a klaxon blared. "I've lost John's signal." Cyborg's voice was sharp with panic, his metallic body rigid at his console. "His ring has gone dark. All comms with the squadron are down." "What do you mean, dark?" Diana demanded, rushing to his side. Izuku was right behind her. "I mean it's offline," Cyborg said, his voice grim. "A lantern's ring only goes dark for one of two reasons: the user is dead, or their will has been completely and utterly broken." The screen flickered to life, showing a satellite feed of the battle. It was a slaughter. Without their leader, without his protective constructs, the human pilots were being torn from the sky by the swarming parademons. One by one, their signals blinked out, and then they saw him. John Stewart. He rose from the crater of his impact unharmed. But his eyes, they were empty. Utterly vacant. Tears streamed down his face, but his expression was a blank mask of despair. The broadcast tower pulsed, and a wave of visible energy washed over him. He didn't even flinch. He was one of them. Batman's voice was like ice. Darkseid didn't just defeat him. He turned him. The implications were horrifying. A Green Lantern, with all the knowledge of the Corps, the Watchtower's defenses, and the personal weaknesses of his friends, was now a puppet of the enemy. "We have to get him back," Superman said, already moving towards the Javelin Bay. "It's a trap, Cal," Batman warned. Darkseid left him there for a reason. "He's bait." "I don't care," Superman replied, his eyes glowing with a faint, dangerous red. "We don't leave our people behind. Ever." The rescue mission was a disaster from the start. Superman, Wonder Woman, and Izuku arrived in the Javelin to find the battlefield silent. The wreckage of the jets was strewn across the sand. There was no sign of John. "Where is he?" Diana asked, her hand on her sword. Izuku's danger sense flared, a sharp, stabbing pain behind his eyes. "Above us." They looked up. John Stewart was floating there, silhouetted against the hateful red sky. He wasn't encased in a green aura. He was surrounded by a sickly, crackling red-orange energy, a twisted, perverted mockery of the lantern light, powered by the rage and fear fed to him by Darkseid. "So," John's voice boomed, amplified by his new power. It was his voice, but stripped of all warmth, all humanity. "The lapdogs of hope have come to retrieve their broken toy." He raised a hand, and a construct formed. It wasn't a complex machine or a simple wall. It was a perfect, giant, red energy sculpture of the planet Xanshi, cracking apart. It radiated waves of pure psychic agony. Superman, a being who had lost his own world, flinched as if struck. The image was a targeted, psychological blow. "John, fight it!" Diana yelled, her voice filled with anguish. "This isn't you, isn't it?" The puppet lantern sneered. "This is the real me. The failure. The destroyer. Darkseid showed me the truth. Hope is a delusion. Will is a cage. Only in serving him is there peace. The peace of absolute certainty." He hurled the Xanshi construct at them. Superman caught it, his muscles straining, his face a mask of pain as the psychic feedback washed over him. It wasn't just heavy, it was filled with the psychic echoes of a billion deaths. While he was pinned, John was on them. He was faster, more brutal than he had ever been. He engaged Diana, his constructs no longer precise architectural designs but savage, brutal weapons, spikes, maces, jagged claws. He knew every weakness in her Amazonian fighting style, countering her moves before she made them. "I know your heart, Diana," he snarled, his red energy construct of a massive hammer crashing against her shield. "You preach peace, but you are a creature of war. You fear that one day, the world of men will reject you for the monster you truly are." Diana cried out, staggering back, the psychological blow landing with more force than the physical one. Izuku watched in horror. This wasn't a fight. It was a vivisection. John was systematically dismantling the two most powerful heroes he had ever met, using their own deepest fears as his weapons. He wasn't just trying to kill them, he was trying to make them break, just as he had. This was the true horror of the anti-life equation. It didn't just kill you. It turned you into a weapon that destroyed everything you ever loved. Izuku knew he was outmatched. His power was nothing compared to theirs. But he couldn't just stand there. He activated full call at 45% and charged, his mind racing. He couldn't overpower John. He couldn't outskill Diana. What could he do? Analyze. He wasn't fighting Green Lantern. He was fighting a man consumed by guilt. The power wasn't coming from a ring. It was being channeled through John from the broadcast tower. The tower is the source. He changed direction, rocketing past the dueling heroes towards the apocalyptic structure. The boy is clever, John noted with cold amusement, not even turning to look. A massive red wall erupted from the sand, blocking Izuku's path. Izuku didn't hesitate. He slammed into it with a full-power Manchester smash, shattering the construct but sending a fresh wave of agony through his already screaming limbs. He landed hard, rolling through the red sand, and came up sprinting. He had to end this. For John. For all of them. He could see them now, Superman on one knee, still struggling with the psychic weight of a dead world. Diana, being forced back, her shield cracking under the relentless, personalized assault. He felt a cold dread he had never known before. He had faced down villains who wanted to kill him, to erase him. But he had never faced an enemy who wanted to annihilate the very concept of heroism itself. He saw All Might's smiling face in his mind, and for the first time, it seemed small and fragile against this cosmic tide of despair. Was it all just a lie? Was hope just a prelude to pain? The whispers of anti-life, silent until now, found their opening. You are small. You are nothing. A lost child in a war of gods. You will die here, and your world will never even know you are gone. His steps faltered. The green lightning around him flickered, just like John's ring had. But then, he felt it. A warmth spreading from his core. Nana Shimura's voice, not a memory, but a feeling, a direct impression on his soul. A hero has to be able to smile, even when things are tough. To reassure the people. But more than that, to reassure themselves. Then, another voice. All Might's. Not a memory of a broadcast, but the real, quiet voice of the man, Tashinori Yagi. You saved me, my boy. You reminded me what it means to be a hero. He saved All Might. He, the quirkless, worthless Deku, had saved his idol. That was not a lie. That was the truest thing in his life. That was his foundation. The whispers of anti-life receded, unable to find purchase on a truth so pure. The green lightning around him roared back to life, brighter than ever before. His eyes hardened with a new, terrible resolve. He wasn't fighting for a symbol anymore. He was fighting for the man who gave it to him. He was fighting for the woman who was teaching him how to bear it. He was fighting for the broken hero in the sky who had forgotten what it meant to be one. I won't let you take any more of them. He screamed, his voice raw. He pushed past his limits, pushing past the pain. He jumped, using float to launch himself into the air, black whip tendrils lashing out, not at John, but at the wreckage of the jets strewn across the desert. He pulled, yanking massive chunks of fuselage and wings into the air around him. He was a comet, surrounded by a shield of debris. John turned his full attention to him, a flicker of genuine surprise on his empty face. A futile gesture. He formed a massive red fist to swat Izuku from the sky. Izuku didn't dodge. He roared, channeling everything, his pain, his fear, his defiant hope, the 9 wills within him, into his legs. Wyoming smash. He kicked the mass of debris with all his might. It wasn't a focused attack. It was a shotgun blast of metal and shrapnel, a desperate, chaotic assault designed to do one thing, create a diversion. As John's construct obliterated the debris, Izuku, under the cover of the explosion, used Fa Gene and shot towards the reeling Diana. I have an idea, he yelled over the din. But I need you to trust me. Wonder Woman, her face grim and stained with sweat, looked from the approaching Superman to the unwavering fire in Izuku's eyes. She nodded. What do you need? I need you to get him to listen. It was a mad plan, born of desperation and a glimmer of insight. And in a war against hopelessness, madness was their only sane option left. The battle for John Stewart's soul was not over. It had just begun. Victory felt like a funeral. They had brought John Stewart back to the watchtower, but they had not rescued him. They had merely relocated the prisoner and his cell. He was contained in a specialized chamber in the med bay, one designed by Batman to hold beings of immense psychic or energy-based power. A shimmering, golden field, a gift from the sorcerer John Constantine, kept him in a state of forced magical stasis. He floated limply in the center of the field, his face a slack, tear-streaked mask of utter despair. The anti-life equation was a parasite that had burrowed too deep to be easily extracted. He was a living trophy of Darkseid's victory, a constant, silent testament to their failure. The psychic fallout from the battle had settled over the watchtower like a shroud. The already fragile morale shattered. John's targeted, personal attacks had been more effective than any physical blow, leaving deep, festering wounds in the League's strongest members. The crisis of faith was no longer a creeping dread. It was a suffocating certainty. Izuku saw it in the Trinity, the three pillars of this world's hope, as they each retreated into their own forms of grief. Superman, the man of tomorrow, seemed lost in the sorrows of the past. He spent long, silent hours in the observatory, his powerful form silhouetted against the broken earth. He didn't speak, didn't move, he just watched, his super-hearing no doubt picking up the billion-fold chorus of the enslaved, the psychic static of a world whose will had been stolen. John's construct of a dying Xanshi had been a cruel blow, a reminder of every life he couldn't save, from Krypton to now. The iconic S on his chest, a symbol of hope, seemed to weigh on him like an anchor, pulling him down into an ocean of guilt. He was shouldering the pain of an entire world, and the strain was making him crack. Batman, in the face of an emotional, illogical defeat, had retreated into the cold, hard fortress of pure data. He became a ghost in the machine, a tireless shark that never stopped moving. He was in the Batcave, or the Watchtower's command center, or his private labs, constantly cross-referencing data streams, analyzing energy signatures, and running combat simulations. He referred to John not by name, but as the compromised asset. He spoke of his friend's condition as a hostile ideological infection. It was his way of coping. By stripping the horror of its humanity, he could treat it as just another problem to be solved. But it was a fragile defense. The coldness was a brittle shield over a burning rage and a profound sense of failure for not having anticipated such an attack. And Diana, the warrior who had taught him balance and control, seemed to have lost her own. Izuku found her in the armory, a vast chamber filled with weapons from 100 different worlds. She was standing before a rack of Amazonian spears, her hand resting on the burnished wood of a familiar shaft, but her gaze was distant. John's words had cut her deep. You preach peace, but you are a creature of war. You fear that one day, the world of men will reject you for the monster you truly are. For centuries, she had walked a tightrope between her Amazonian heritage as a warrior and her mission as an emissary of peace. She had always fought to prove that strength and compassion could coexist. John's taunt had preyed upon her deepest, most private insecurity, that at her core, she was simply a weapon, and that the world she loved would one day cast her out. She, who was forged from clay and truth, was questioning the very foundation of her own identity. This was the true genius of Darkseid's weapon. It didn't just break bodies, it broke spirits. It found the hairline fractures in the souls of heroes and hammered them with a cosmic force until they shattered. Izuku felt the defeat more keenly than any of them. He was adrift in a sea of their grief, and his own guilt was a stone in his gut. His plan, his desperate, reckless plan, had worked, but to what end? They had subdued John, but they had not saved him. He had seen the flicker of the real John Stewart in his eyes when Diana had used her lasso to force a moment of clarity, just long enough for Superman to subdue him. But the equation had reasserted itself with the viciousness of a cornered animal, and the light had vanished. Now, Izuku found himself in the same place as Superman, the observatory. He couldn't bear the oppressive silence of the med bay or the cold, frantic energy of the command center. Here, at least, the scale of the cosmos was a strange comfort. It made him feel impossibly small, a tiny, insignificant speck. And right now, insignificance felt safer than responsibility. He leaned his forehead against the cool, transparent aluminum of the dome, looking down at the world that was not his. He saw the network of darkness spreading, the lights of human civilization winking out one by one. He had come here, full of the lessons of All Might, believing that a hero's job was to win, to save the day. But how do you punch an idea? How do you smash despair? His power, one for all, felt like a cruel joke. It was the power to move mountains, but it was useless against the doubt that was eroding the very ground beneath his feet. Jon Stewart had been one of the strongest people he had ever met, his will literally a cosmic force. And he had fallen. The Justice League, a pantheon of gods, was falling. If they can be broken, a cold, terrifying thought slithered into his mind, what chance do I have? The whispers of anti-life, which he had so forcefully rejected in the desert, returned with a new, seductive logic. They didn't shout anymore. They reasoned. See? Their hope was a flaw. Their love was a vulnerability. Darkseid simply showed them the truth. The universe is a cold, empty place, boy. Your feelings, your bonds, your ridiculous idealism, they are not a shield. They are a target. He thought of his friends. Of Uraraka's bright smile, of Ida's unwavering loyalty, of Bakugo's explosive, challenging presence. He thought of his mother, of All Might. He had always believed that fighting for them was what made him strong. But the equation was showing him that love was just a weapon the enemy could use against you. Darkseid had used Jon's guilt over a lost world and his love for a dead wife to utterly destroy him. What would Darkseid use against him? He squeezed his eyes shut, a wave of nausea and vertigo washing over him. For the first time, he truly, profoundly understood the enemy. And for the first time, he was afraid that the enemy was right. The stars are beautiful from here, are they not? The voice was soft, melodic, but carried a weariness that hadn't been there a week ago. Izuku turned. Diana stood at the entrance to the observatory, her armor looking heavy on her shoulders. She walked towards him, her steps slow, and stood beside him at the window. They offer a sense of perspective, she continued, her gaze distant. They remind us that our struggles, as all-consuming as they feel, are but a flicker in the grand tapestry of creation. It doesn't feel like a flicker, Izuku mumbled, his voice hoarse. It feels like the end of everything. Diana was silent for a moment. Jon was my friend, she said quietly. He was a good man. To see him, to see what Darkseid made him. It is a violation beyond any I have witnessed. It's my fault, Izuku said, the words tumbling out, laced with shame. My plan. All it did was get him captured. We didn't save him. We just caged him. Your plan saved Kal-El and myself from breaking, Diana corrected him, her voice firm, cutting through his self-pity. You created an opening where there was none. What happened to Jon is not on you. It is on Darkseid. She sighed, the sound full of a pain that seemed impossibly ancient. But this war, it is not fought on a battlefield of flesh and bone. It is fought here. She tapped her temple. And it is a war I fear we are losing. This was the moment of truth. The raw, unfiltered confession of his own terror. What if he's right? Izuku whispered, the question he had been terrified to even form in his own mind. What if Darkseid is right? He told Jon that hope is a delusion, that will is a cage. He uses everything good about people, their love, their loyalty, their memories, and turns it into a weapon to destroy them. How do we fight that? If our strengths are just our biggest weaknesses, then what's the point? He finally looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears of frustration and fear. My power comes from hope. From the belief that things can be better. If that belief is a lie, then what am I? What is one for all? It's just a battery of false hope, waiting to be turned against my friends. Diana looked at the young man before her, his spirit so bright and now so clouded with doubt. She saw in him a reflection of her own fears, of the entire League's fears. A simple pep talk, a warrior's speech about courage, would be meaningless. The poison of anti-life wasn't fought with words, but with truth. She unclipped the golden lasso from her hip. It glowed with a soft, warm light in the dim observatory. In Themyscira, she began, her voice regaining some of its melodic strength. We have a saying, the truth will set you free, but first it will break you. You are filled with doubt because you are fighting a lie that feels like the truth. There is only one way to defeat such a lie. She held the lasso out to him. It wasn't a threat or a test. It was an offering. This is the lasso of Hestia, she explained. It does not force a confession. It does not compel you to speak. It simply reveals. It strips away the lies, the fears, the doubts, and shows the holder the unshakable truth that resides within their own heart. It can be a terrifying experience. Many are not strong enough to face their own inner truth. She looked him directly in the eye, her own gaze clear and piercing. I am not offering this to interrogate you, Izuku. I am offering it as an anchor. So you may find your own truth in this storm of lies. Izuku stared at the glowing rope, his heart pounding. He was terrified. What if he held it and found nothing? What if the truth inside him was that he was just a scared child, that his hope was a sham? But then he looked at Diana's face, at the unwavering belief she held in him, even when her own was shaken. She trusted him with this. He had to trust himself. With a trembling hand, he reached out and took hold of the lasso. The moment his fingers touched the warm, golden metal, the world vanished. There was no light, no sound. Only a suffocating, cold emptiness. He was floating in a void, utterly alone. A voice, Darkseid's voice, echoed from all directions, a voice of crushing, geological certainty. You are the ninth. The end of a failed line. A candle lit in a hurricane. Your purpose is to be extinguished. Then, the void was filled with images. He saw the training grounds at Yue, but they were empty, covered in dust. He saw his mother, sitting alone in their apartment, her face blank, tears streaming from her vacant eyes. He saw Uraraka and Ida, their hero costumes tattered, standing with the same mindless despair as the people of Metropolis. They looked at him, their expressions empty, and turned away. Everyone you fight for will be consumed. Your love for them only makes you a better tool for their enslavement. The most painful vision came last. He was in a dark alley, a skeletal, dying All Might in his arms. The symbol of peace, withered and frail, coughed blood onto his chest. It was all for nothing, my boy, the vision of his mentor rasped. I chose wrong. You were not worthy. A cry of pure agony tore from Izuku's soul. This was it. This was the truth the lasso was showing him. His deepest, most profound fear made manifest. The whispers were right. He was a failure. He felt himself begin to dissolve, to break apart, to surrender to the all-consuming despair. This was the peace of anti-life. The surrender of the struggle. But then, a flicker. From the deepest part of his being, a tiny, defiant spark of warmth. It was a memory, a feeling. Nana Shimura, bloodied and beaten, turning to face All for One with a wide, fearless smile. The feeling wasn't one of victory, but of defiance. It was the feeling of someone who knew they were going to die, but chose to face it on their own terms, as a hero. The warmth grew. Another presence joined it. Daigoro Banjo, lariat, roaring with laughter as he charged into a hopeless battle, not because he thought he would win, but because his comrades were behind him. It was the spirit of loyalty, of brotherhood, a bond stronger than fear. One by one they came. Not as ghosts, but as pillars of light and feeling in the darkness. The quiet determination of En. The sharp, analytical focus of Haikid Shinomori. The noble sacrifice of the first user. They weren't just a power source. They were a legacy of heroic wills, a ninefold chorus of defiance against the dying of the light. The vision of the dying All Might wavered. The real All Might, the true spirit of Tashinori Yagi, rose to meet it. It wasn't the muscle-bound symbol of peace, nor the skeletal man. It was a column of pure, golden, sun-bright energy, radiating an unconditional belief that was the antithesis of the void. You saved me, my boy. The voice was not a memory, but a living truth inside him. You reminded me what it means to be a hero. The darkness began to recede, burned away by the rising chorus of light. The visions of his broken friends faded, replaced by their real faces. Uraraka, floating with a determined grin. Ida, chopping the air with earnest passion. Todoroki, his two sides in perfect balance. Bakugo, snarling, but always moving forward. Eri, her face lit up with a joyous smile as she held a candy apple. He saw them all, the constellation of people who formed his world. And he finally understood. Darkseid was wrong. Love wasn't a vulnerability. It was a shield. Hope wasn't a delusion. It was a weapon. His job as a hero wasn't just to win battles. It was to protect the things that made life worth living, the smiles, the laughter, the bonds between people. His purpose was not to end despair. His purpose was to be the reason hope endures, even in its presence. The victory wasn't the end of the war. It was in the choice to keep fighting, every single day. The lasso showed him the final, unshakable truth. One for All was not a battery of false hope. It was a promise, passed down through generations, that even in the deepest darkness, humanity would light a candle. He was not the end of the line. He was the 9th person to make that promise, and he would not be the last. In the observatory, Diana watched in absolute awe. The moment Izuku had grasped the lasso, it had erupted in a torrent of golden light, so bright she had to shield her eyes. The light was pure, intense, a physical manifestation of Hestia's divine power. She had seen the lasso glow before, but never like this. It was not just glowing, it was singing. Then, from the heart of the golden incandescence, a new light emerged. A vibrant, crackling, emerald green. It swirled with the gold, intertwining with it, two primal forces, the divine spirit of truth and the mortal spirit of heroism, dancing together in a silent, breathtaking symphony. The combined light pulsed outwards, filling the observatory, pushing back the shadows, and for a moment, it felt as if the oppressive psychic despair of the anti-life equation was being held at bay by the sheer force of the boy's spirit. Diana, princess of Themyscira, daughter of Hippolyta, who had walked with gods and fought demons from the pits of Tartarus, had never seen anything like it. She was witnessing the raw, unfiltered power of a soul so pure, so fundamentally good, that it could make even a divine artifact resonate with its song. The light slowly subsided. The lasso returned to its gentle, warm glow. Izuku stood before her, his head bowed, his breathing steady. When he looked up, the fear and confusion in his eyes were gone. The frantic, anxious energy that always seemed to hum beneath his skin was gone. He was still himself, but he was more centered, more solid than she had ever seen him. In his eyes was a calm, serene certainty, an unbreakable resolve. He gently let go of the lasso, and it coiled back into Diana's hand, feeling warm and alive. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I needed that." "What did you see?" she asked, her voice hushed with reverence. "Everything," he replied with a small, genuine smile. "All my fears. All my doubts. And the truth that was stronger than all of them." He looked out at the broken earth again, but this time, his gaze wasn't one of despair. It was one of purpose. "I know my place in this war now," he said. "I can't punch Darkseid's philosophy into submission. No one can. You can't destroy an idea with force. But you can fight it with a better one." He turned to face her, his green eyes burning with a calm intensity. "Batman is the mind of the League, fighting with strategy. Superman is the heart, fighting with his strength. You are the soul, fighting with your warrior's spirit. They're all trying to end the despair. But I can't do that. My role," he said, a profound understanding dawning on his face, "is to be the thing that stands beside it. I'm the proof that he's wrong. I am the League's living, breathing counter-argument to the anti-life equation. As long as I'm here, as long as One for All exists, it's a living testament that hope is not a lie, that self-sacrifice has meaning, and that the will to protect others is the most powerful force in the universe." Diana stared at him, her heart swelling with a pride so fierce it almost brought her to tears. The boy she had found in the rubble, the reckless student she had trained, had just found the core of his own legend. He had faced the abyss and had not flinched. He had forged his own spirit into a weapon. She placed a hand on his shoulder, no longer as a mentor to a student, but as an equal. "A fellow warrior. Then let us be that argument together," she said, her own resolve hardening, her own doubts burned away by the light of his truth. In the quiet of the Watchtower's observatory, surrounded by the silence of a dying world, two heroes, one a goddess born of clay, the other a boy born of dreams, stood ready. The war was far from over, but for the first time since it began, they were no longer just fighting against the darkness. They were fighting for the light.